Welcome to Design to Move, a weekly functional movement series reviewing common movement impairment syndromes, muscle imbalances, and injury cycles and how to correct for them. Don't just exercise, but restore optimal movement.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Design to Move. My name is Ryan Matzel. This is Ryan Parr, both movement specialist. Today we're going to talk about a movement distortion pattern called upper cross. It basically has to do with the tightening of the front muscles around the shoulders and the chest, and a weakening of the muscles in the neck or the deep cervical flexors. This has a tendency to pull our rib line down into depression. Last week we talked about rounded shoulders. You're going to see a lot of these postures together can lead to a lot of issues and pain in the shoulders and the neck. So if you want more information, we do have a blog on the topic. It's in the description below. Or if you need to reach out to us directly, you can reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. To the side, you'll see that we have a table of contents with a timestamp of all of our segments and a condensed version of this whole video orientation at the bottom, so you can reference that if you don't want to watch the whole thing. On that note, let's get started. Our first segment is mobility and release. This time, guys, we're going to work on our pec major and our latissimus dorsi, both of which attach the ribs basically to the arms. So obviously we overuse them, so we're going to show you how to release them. Let's get started. First muscle we're going to target today is the pectoralis major. Last week we talked about the pec minor. It's the smaller of the pec complex. It actually attaches the scapula down to the rib cage. This one actually attaches the ribs, sternum, and the collarbone to the humerus. So it actually pulls the arm inward towards the middle of the body. You see this in positions where you do like a push-up or a bench press, chest fly, oftentimes overused, especially in male populations, right? So what we want to do is learn how to reduce it using a soft tissue release technique using our foam ball. So this is going to basically go on the pec. We're going to start at the sternal attachment, work our way towards the humerus until we feel a tender point, and then you're going to place that right down in the middle of the pectoral belly, and then you're going to use body weight in order to compress it. So Ryan's going to get into position. He's going to do it on his left shoulder. We're trying to get our body into an orientation where it would look like we would be walking. So if I'm stepping forward on my left leg, my arm would go behind me, it would rotate behind me, and that's going to stretch through the pec. So we're going to try to get our body into that natural position to position the pec in a way that it's going to want to relax. So we're going to start with the arm basically on the wall, braced against the wall. You're going to draw the arm back until you feel a natural pressure, but it should be basically soft. Okay, so it's passive, meaning it's not under flexion and it's not overly stretched. And then you're going to push your body weight diagonally into the ball. That's going to compress the pec between the ball and the rib. So once we have that under pressure, you'll feel it as, again, subtle pressure or maybe even a little bit uncomfortable, but not really bad. And then we're going to breathe in, draw our arm back by rotating through the sternum and pulling our sternum away from the wall. So Ryan's going to basically pull his arm back away from the wall. He's going to rotate his ribs inward, and he's going to push through his other arm. So you're opposing the curvicular tensions of the ribs and the scapula. Then he's going to breathe out, relax, and let his body basically just fall into a natural, soft, and passive relationship. So you're going to go through multiple iterations. Breathe in, head's going to be turned into the right, eyes would be directed down to the left, arm on the back side, it's going to go back behind you into extension, maybe a little bit of flexion, but it's going to be more abduction, again, of the arm, adduction of the scapula, shoulders going towards the spine, arms going away from the ribs, and then go through multiple successions of breath as you let that muscle pull through the tension of the ball, okay? And there it is. So that's a soft tissue release of the pectoral major, and that's a common overused muscle group. Remember, it attaches the arms to the ribs, so it pulls the arms forward like so. So now the next one is going to be your latissimus dorsi. It's a big flanking muscle, and we'll turn Ryan for this. Attaches from the thoracolumbar fascia back here, sweeps up around the ribs, under the armpit, attaches to basically where the pec attaches, and it pulls the arm into extension and internally rotates it. So if it's overused, you'll see the shoulders want to dump forward, and then we exhibit that upper cross syndrome where we see the shoulders dump in, pulling too much pressure into the back of the neck muscles, etc., right? So we're going to show you how to do that. We're going to do that with a foam roller. So Ryan's going to get down on the ground. He's got the foam roller just underneath of his shoulder blades. He's on top of it. Now he's gonna rotate his body into the left, so we're gonna stay on the left side of the body to start with. So he's making sure to keep his ribs and his hips moving in the same direction. Make sure you keep your abs braced by breathing out a little bit before you rotate so you don't put too much pressure on the rib cage. So what you'll notice again, Ryan's basically on the edge of the roller with the arm, or the roller just underneath of his scapula. So it's not too high up, and he's rolled into the rib cage or into the chest wall, so he's feeling the pressure right on the belly of his muscle. Ryan, you can feel that, right? Yeah. You'll notice that he's got a fairly neutral spinal alignment so that his hips, ribs, and shoulders are stacked on each other, and he's got his knees tucked up into his ribs a little bit into flexion. So this gives him the position or the advantage point to be able to lift his arm up and down into flexion, so his left arm can go and lift up overhead. And as he does that, he's going to want to rotate his palm upwards towards the ceiling to, again, basically do the opposite of the muscle action. So Ryan, go ahead and show him a couple examples of that. He's going to draw it up. And as he does this, he's going to start feeling pressure of that muscle gliding, or really trying to stretch under the pressure of the roller. And then as he's doing this at the same time, he's going to bring up the opposite leg into flexion. So this is going to resemble just a gait pattern, ambulation. His flexion of his right leg would be accompanied by flexion of his left arm. And this is going to stretch through the lat and give him a chance to get the muscle to relax under pressure. So he's breathing in as he lifts up, breathes out as he brings his arm back down with his palm towards the floor. Gonna sink into the belly of the muscle, let it settle, see if you can get a little bit deeper, and then breathe in and reach back up overhead with the palm up towards the ceiling. So what might help you to increase the stretch is if you breathe in, and as you breathe in, reach up and bring the elbow closer in towards the temple, and again, bring that opposite leg up into flexion a little more. Okay, you'll get a deeper stretch by doing that. Last thing, you can see Ryan's using his opposite arm to support his head, so he's not going to put extra strain into his neck or into the rib line, and that's going to help to keep him from guarding through his lat. So make sure to do that. Now, for both the pec major and the latissimus dorsi, you're going to want to do this for about 60 seconds to 2 minutes on both sides. The breathing pattern counts, so if you're pulling the arm behind your body, you're going to breathe in, and then as you relax it and sink into the belly of the muscle, you would breathe out. Same for the lat. You're gonna breathe in as you reach up and breathe out as you come down. And then again, you would do that for about 6 to 10 breathing cycles until you're able to get to the full range of motion on the joint, which is about 180 degrees, okay? 180 degrees here and about 60 degrees back into extension for the pec. And that brings us to the end of our stretching sequence. And this brings us to our activation segment. Here's where we're going to show you how to specifically target the underactive muscle groups associated with upper cross. So you'll see Ryan's on the table here. We're going to be doing an overhead, basically reach with our arms. Now the focal point of this exercise is to teach you how to maintain the depression and retraction of your scapula while allowing the arm to glide into flexion. Now the problem is most of us have a distorted upper chest or pectoral girdle, anterior pectoral girdle. So our arms like to pull the shoulders away from the rib and pull them into an anterior glide forward. So that means that the muscles that hold them down and back are weak and deficient. So what we're using is gravity to our advantage with a little additional weight. Ryan's got some dumbbells in his hands to teach us how to hold that fixed and stable isometric position of your shoulder blades back and towards the spine as the arm comes overhead. So this will start to give us an understanding of how well we can keep that positioning before we start to go into the altered posture that leads to all those injury cycles. So a couple things to keep in mind when you're laying on your back. You're gonna wanna make sure that your body's in a neutral alignment so the knees are inside the hip line. His knees are bent at roughly 90 degrees with his feet flat on the floor. He's gonna pull gently back into his butt so he feels an engagement of his hamstrings. He's also gonna get all the air out of his ribs to depress the lower back into the table so that he can maintain the posture of his rib line and thoracic so that the scapula can glide around the rib cage as they're supposed to with the depressed ribs. And then he's gonna move his arms into the action. So Ryan, go ahead and bring him up horizontally. So he's in horizontal flexion, and you'll notice that he's bringing his arms out into abduction or scapular planes of motion first to again make sure that he's not pulling his arms forward inferiorly or depressing them down inferiorly, okay? You'll notice that his shoulders are down and depressed. His chin is tucked, so his eye line is directly vertical. And now he's gonna breathe out, get all the air out of his ribs. Hold the ribs into a fixed position, and then he's gonna maintain that pressure he's gonna breathe in and slowly glide his arms back diagonally until he starts to feel either pressure in the front of his shoulder, or he notices that the shoulder blade starts to lift off the table or towards his ears and slide up. What you might also notice is that as he brings his arms back, he's not letting his lower back arch off the ground. That's a pretty challenging position, right, Ryan? Yeah. So if you're doing it right, you don't need a ton of weight. So the goal here is not to take a bunch of weight and see if you can pull it over your head. The goal here is to be able to keep the pressure in your abdominal wall, to hold the ribs into a depressed position or a protracted position as you retract to depress the shoulders, and then see if you can glide the arm in that fixed cavity without it starting to pull the shoulder blades up. As soon as it goes up, you're gonna come back with the arms and see if you can get longer and longer and longer. This is a nice upper body global release for the pecs and the lats. So while we just stretch them or just roll them to create the length and the relationships there, this will actually help to stretch them while increasing the strength of the muscles that are normally deficient. That's gonna be your serratus, your rhomboids, and your lower mid trapezius. All again, engaged in a functional motion like that. So good job, Ryan. So you'll notice that he did a nice slow arc. He did it with about 4 seconds down. He only got to his in-cap range of motion where the joint would start to dissociate or move, and then he brought them back in a pretty deliberate execution, 1 or 2 seconds. You would do about 2 sets of 20 repetitions. Give yourself a minute of time in between. If you notice that you can't complete all the volume in that time frame without showing up with distortions in the lower back or the arms, just make sure to kill it, and then you can add volume over multiple successions or sequences. Okay, and that's it for activation. And now we're at our integration segment. Here's where we show you how to use all the muscles around these joint centers and the way that they're supposed to fire so that it helps to maintain your joint's natural positioning and the axis of rotation of the appendages. So Ryan's on the ground here and he's offset to our column here. We've got an exercise band. This is about a 3-pound exercise tension, okay? And it's anchored about the height of his eye line. Now, what we want to do, and you can do this from home, you can buy one of these bands online or at our site even, but you're going to want to anchor it maybe to a doorknob. You're going to be about 3 feet away from the wall, and he's going to get into a V-sit position. So what we're trying to do is first make sure that his pelvis and his lower portion of his spine is neutral. Being in a V-sit is naturally going to put a curvature into your spine where you start to flex down into your abs and you start stretching through the erectors, all of which again leads to what? Upper cross posture. So what we're trying to do is coordinate the engagement of the muscles that maintain the natural symmetry of the alignment of the spine, of the lumbar portion of our spine, and our pelvis, while allowing our ribs to stay in their neutral position, and then engage the muscles that pull the shoulder blades around the rib cage, as you would see in natural function. So one arm would go into horizontal adduction, while one arm came back into horizontal abduction. So now that we've restored the natural relationships of the pecs and lats, and started to engage the muscles that hold those shoulder blades back bilaterally, we're going to functionally put it into a unilateral relationship by working on the retraction of one arm with the protraction of the other. Okay, so that's how we make this integrative. So he's going to get his knees to bend to about 60 degrees or so. He's going to make sure that the pressure around his spine isn't so great that he feels pain. He's going to arch through his spine to try to get more length out of his back. He's going to glide his shoulders down into a depressed state to begin with, and he's going to hold his chin into a depressed state so that his head is flexed down a little bit. Deep cervical flexor, remember, it's part of this upper breast issue. Now he's going to breathe in and glide his arm back into scaption with horizontal abduction of the arm. At the same time, he's going to protract his opposite arm around the ribs and then bring it back down to a neutral and basic position. So he breathes in, pulls the scapula back around the fixed ribs, pulls the arms in the glenoid fossa, and then makes the arm go back. Now again, we're using dynamic tension from the band as an assist in trying to overload these back muscles over here, his rhomboids, his lower mid trapezius, his scalenes, or not scalenes, but sternocleidomastoid, all of these guys that hold the shoulder down and back, and at the same time he's protracting with the opposite arm. So good job, Ryan. You'll notice if you fatigue, a couple things are going to happen. The back's going to start to round, the head may come forward, you may actually go into extension and rotate posteriorly in the cranium or on the skull. The shoulder may shrug up as you pull the arm back, or you may begin to again start to want to move through the torso. all of which we want to try to avoid. It's going to set up other postural issues that we're trying to defeat. And you may want to take shortened breaths. So as you come through it, you're going to try to breathe in smaller, again, because you're trying to keep those abdominals nice and strong. Either way, just recall that all of these things are things that we're going to want to work on and avoid. So you're going to try to go through 2 sets of 20 repetitions. It's going to give you about 2 minutes of time. You might start to feel burning in your hip flexors, maybe some pressure through the back. Again, these are all customary signs that your body's starting to overuse those guys. And then that's okay because your hip flexors are weak, so keep going with it. But make sure again that you don't use the alignment that we just described. Keep the joint positions healthy. So make sure 2 sets, 20 repetitions, and then we're done with this segment. And we're gonna finish with our last segment, strength. Here's how we're gonna show you how to overload the muscles that are gonna be responsible for maintaining these positions for the long haul. So Ryan set up for what we call a face pull. Essentially what this is doing is working 2 different types of mechanics. We're basically trying to get the shoulder back into a depressed and retracted position. The muscles that pull the scapula back are the rhomboids, lower mid-traps, and again serratus, a few other muscle groups. Now we have the muscles that are going to also then externally rotate the humerus in the joint. Again, the scapula is essentially the joint. There's a little divot in the scapula where the humerus rolls in. And then there are muscles that are going to externally rotate that arm back. In this case, that would be the infraspinatus and teres minor. Okay, now as he does that, he's also going to get some of his posterior deltoid. Now remember, if we have altered length relationships or tension relationships around our core, and we like to hyperextend, you're going to use your lower back to do the work instead of using the muscles that pull the arms back into depression, like the rhomboid, lower mid-trapezius, and again, the serratus. So the goal here is to make sure that we keep a fixed rib position by keeping it depressed. You can actively breathe out to engage your abs to do that. Crunch it down. Once the ribs are nice and in a stable position, you can breathe in, inflate the rib line while still maintaining abdominal pressure, then glide the shoulder around the rib, and then externally rotate the humerus in the fixed joint. Now that is the rhythm of this whole mechanic that we want to see. And again, we're going to try to practice that as we add load with the dynamic source using an exercise band. So Ryan has this anchored up by his face. It's about the height of his chin or eyes. And then the band's going to come back horizontally towards his head. And you'll notice again, he's going to retract the shoulders, breathe out, keep the ribs down, breathe in, inflate through the ribs, glide the shoulders back and down, and then externally rotate and pull the arms back to parallel to his ear, or in his case, he's got great range of motion, right back at the base of his skull. So the goal would be to see how well you can do that without shrugging or internally rotating or lifting through the rib and hyperextending through the lower back. You also notice that sometimes your knees are going to want to buckle as you try to adjust for that tension relationship through the hip flexors. So make sure to try to keep your legs somewhat straight, keep your glutes flexed, keep the hips nice and braced, get your abs involved by breathing out, and then pull the arms back until you can try to get a parallel line between the elbow and the wrist, right in line with the ear, with again, no shrug or again, internal rotation. If you see that, you're going to want to stop. So one more time, this is a strength position. We're staying time under tension for about 2 minutes. See a common thread in all of our exercises that we do with Design to Move. Just so you guys know, 20 repetitions with a nice slow eccentric opening of the joint puts about 2 minutes of time on the muscle. That engages your type 1 muscle fiber. These are muscle fibers on a physiological level that help to stabilize, right? So we want to work these muscles to fatigue so that the body, again, will remember how to maintain those positions once they get stiffer and stronger, and then he can make his posture change without having to think about it. So there's no bracing element for him to keep his natural alignment and the health of his joint centers. So one more time, you would do 2 sets, again, of 20 repetitions for about 2 minutes of time under tension. Give yourself a minute of time in between, and that'll bring us to the end of our strength segment. Remember, upper cross is a movement distortion or postural distortion where your arms aren't basically in the position that they need to be. They're too far forward of their natural resting position vertically, and this has a tendency to be accompanied with excess kyphosis, the rounding of the spine. Your ribs come down, your head goes backward, and your neck goes forward. And we see this a lot because of, again, desk work, doing things out in front of us, overloading the front muscle groups like our pecs and our lats like we released today, and because of which it oftentimes leads to injury cycles that creep up on us over the course of time. So if you see any of these postures in your body, the ones that we described today, make sure to apply what you learned today a couple times each week, and you should see a noticeable increase in your natural vertical posture and the positioning of your shoulders without having to think about it. And that's the goal, to make sure that this stays around and that the joint centers become naturally balanced. So one more time, if you have any questions, reach out to us at Admin at Fluid Health and Fitness. Once again, read the article on the topic down below in the description. Remember guys, your body is designed to move, so stay in motion. We'll see you soon.